right? Content's the same.
Yeah.
Flipped or not. Well, I guess it looks the wording is backwards.
Yeah, but it's not actually reversed in real life.
That's strange. Let me go look at it on.
It's because it's probably a lot of people use it to film themselves.
Oh. So they do that so you can see what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks fine. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's running. This is you see set up with the line over here.
No, do we have one?
I thought they do have one. We don't have to.
Yeah. What's that? Bria's right in the front. Right in the
Hello. Thank you everyone for coming out. Welcome to the Bitcoin and Open Blockchain meetup. Hold on, lots of notes. All right, so I think I know a lot of you, but for those of you that I don't know, hello, I'm Hannah. I'm one of the organizers. Ian is also one of the organizers. Raise your hand, Ian.
Hey.
So if you are new, feel free to introduce yourself. If you are also new to crypto, you're welcome to ask all your very new questions to me and Ian, and we can help you set up the wallets and on your phone and all that good stuff. All right. So we are streaming on YouTube. That's the camera right there. If you don't want to be on YouTube, stay behind that camera. There are drinks at the bar. We have water, sparkling water, coffee, beer, wine. At any time, go help yourself to all that good stuff. After the event, Saif will be doing a book signing. So I think we're gonna do that over here, perhaps at that table down there. That's after talk, after Q&A. We will have pizza. That'll probably arrive roughly when we're doing Q&A. So when that arrives, again, feel free to go up and help yourself some pizza. When we are all done here, please, hang out, get to know your fellow attendees. There is actually a Ethereum bootcamp happening in that room right there that you walk past. So they are going to be hanging out here for the evening. I think they have a happy hour at 5 p.m. So we might, combine forces for an after party later. We'll see. I think some of you guys are going out to your carnivore dinner this evening, so enjoy that one. Otherwise, you're welcome to stay and hang out with the rest of us here. Well, until Bria kicks us out, anyhow. So we'll see how long that is. All right, so Bob, we try really hard to keep these events free and open to everyone. We survive off of donations and sponsors. So if you're feeling generous today, we do have a jar back there for fiat donations and a QR code for Bitcoin donations. We also need to thank our sponsors today. That is the Blockchain Institute. The Blockchain Institute was founded to promote the adoption, development, and use of blockchain technology. There's a table back there. You see those lovely t-shirts out on the table. Those are free. Help yourself to one of them. There we go. Thank you. There are pins and stickers. Full disclosure, I am on the board of the Blockchain Institute. So I'm on the board because I like them. I think they're doing awesome things, so I'm happy to have them as a Bob sponsor as well. All right, so we generally do lightning talks before our main event. Do we have any lightning talks today? Joe, you doing one? Do we have any other lightning talks today? One more? Okay, if you're doing a lightning talk, please come up over on this side over here. They are, for those of you who are not familiar, lightning talk is a chance for any of you to come up here and tell the rest of us about the project you're working on, or recruit people to join your project, or announce something you're excited about, whatever the case may be. You do get 2 minutes, and only 2 minutes. So I'm very nice, I'll give you a 10-second warning, and then I'm just stealing your microphone. All right. So I have to go get my timer. First up is Disruption Joe.
And I will be way less than 2 minutes. I just want to make sure that everybody who's here knows that we have a big event called The Voice of Blockchain. It is coming up April 24th and 25th. We're doing it at Navy Pier. We have 2 days of 3 stages of lineups that are going over specific vertical industry use cases. Some of my favorite talks are we have Brian Jenkins, a CNN reporter from 82 to 94 that was at Tiananmen Square interviewing Brittany Kaiser, the Cambridge Analytic and whistleblower. We have Matt Rozak and Edmund Moy, the 38th director of the U.S. Mint, sitting down together to talk about minting currencies. All kinds of cool stuff. You look at that, we have from like the prediction market person that was running the 2012 Obama campaign, or talking with them, to different voting applications, and everything in between. So check out voiceblockchain.com. We have some really awesome stuff there. I think we have a code Bob Meetup for 100 off, I believe. Is that a thing right now? I believe it is. Yeah, Bob Meetup for 100 off. And if not, just come and see me. I'll be here and around. Thank you, everybody.
Two minutes, there you go.
So I have this idea I just want to share with everybody. I need some help with this idea. So the idea basically works like this. I think we can get some no coiners into Bitcoin, and for those of you that don't understand what that means, basically it's like folks that don't own any coins, like Bitcoin. So I don't know if anybody has tried to convince like a friend or family member how awesome Bitcoin is, and they don't understand it and they don't have any Bitcoin, and you just can't convince them to buy Bitcoin. So I came up with this idea where basically we can create a platform which is interest-free lending. And the way it would work is, so I use what's called dollar cost averaging when I buy Bitcoin. I have a certain amount of cash allocated, and I'll just buy. I don't care what the price is so much. If it's kind of high, I'll buy a little less. If it's kind of low, I'll buy a little more. So I really don't care what the price is. So I have cash allocated. So what I can do, and what I think a lot of us can do, is we can sort of aggregate the cash into one account where we use it to buy the Bitcoin. And so we have all that cash sitting there, and what we can do is lend it to no-pointer debtors at interest-free rates. Any questions? Go ahead.
That sounds centralized to me. How do you solve that?
No, it's super centralized. It's
Alright.
it's 100% centralized. So for like Ethereum fans, you guys would like it. Go ahead.
I personally would never lend money for 0%.
Okay, so you're not going to join the platform. I think it's an awesome idea. Let's think about it. Thank you very much.
All right, continue the debate later. All right, you have one more? Come on up. All right, 2 minutes in, go.
Good afternoon, my name is Dan Smith. I'm from Iowa City, Iowa. We're part of a startup. I'm director of product and operations of SureBits.com. I drove in this morning, and we have a contingent from Iowa here. First time to be in here, so expect to be here again. So SureBits is building a Lightning application on top of Bitcoin, obviously, using Lightning Network. We have our version 0 release that just went live last Thursday. We're using Sports data right now, but what we're trying to build is really a data mart for live data feeds. So if you ever see me on Twitter or see anything I talk about those sweet Satoshis. We're doing micro data feeds and micro pricing. Our version right now is only on testnet, so there's no risk in testing it out. You can go to surebits.com, check our API documentation, and a little bit on the company. The founder, Chris Stewart, graduated and went to one of the first Boost VC accelerators with the Drakers. So we've been in this space for a while, and we're pretty excited and really happy to be here today. And if anybody's looking or knows developers are looking, come see me or go to our listing and meet with us. Thank you very much.
Anyone else before we get started? Lightning talk? All right, come on up. All right, 2 minutes.
Hi guys, my name is Eric Glenn. I'm from Dapper Network. We're actually hosting an educational bootcamp right now across the hallway over there. We're a startup based out of Los Angeles. Essentially what we are is that we are a traveling bootcamp that provides Solidity education, which is a language that is primarily used for both decentralized applications. And we take it to cities all over the world to connect really hungry and developers that are talented, that have the appetite for blockchain development with some of the best mentors and current engineers in the blockchain space. So we're actually having a happy hour later after this, and I invited Hannah to have your group join. I think the gentleman that just spoke before me was talking about engineers or developers. That's what we have. So we'd love to have you guys network with our engineers. They're everyone that's going to be entering the blockchain space very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, you done with lightning talks? Excellent. We'll get on to the main event. I think most of you know who our guest is today, but in case you're not familiar, Saif is the assistant professor of economics at the Lebanese American University. He's a foreign member of the Center for Capitalism and Society at Columbia University. He's been researching Bitcoin and blockchain for 7 years now, and his book, The Bitcoin Standard, is the first book on the economics of Bitcoin. So please welcome Dr. Saif Ammous.
First of all, thank you so much, Anne and Ian, for organizing this, and thanks to everybody for coming. It's a pleasure to be in Chicago City. I like a lot. Been here many times. Always gets better every time. Speak louder. Okay. Is this fine? Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. So what I'm going to do today is present some of the main ideas in my book. I'm going to try and be as brief as possible, so that we can get into the discussion, because I find that the animated discussion is more animated. It's a better way to spend our time rather than me just standing here lecturing. So this isn't going to be everything in the book, and I'm not going to elaborate a lot on many of the ideas because it's a 300-page book. I can't do it in a few minutes on stage. But I'd like to just guide you to some of the things that, if you're interested, you can read more about in the book. And then afterwards, I have a bunch of copies for anybody who's interested in buying it. And if you have your own copy, I'm happy to sign it as well. So essentially, what I'm going to talk about are these topics today. Why Bitcoin is unique as a monetary unit. What is Bitcoin good for? And what is the importance or the implications of having a hard money? These three main topics. So what is it that gets used as money? There are a lot of theories and a lot of theories about what it is that is money. And I like to. I'm just going to skip to what I think matters the most towards something becoming money, and it is specifically the hardness of producing it. Anything that is easy to produce is not going to serve as a good money. So obviously there are other things which are visibility, portability, physical properties that are essential for something to be money. But with the advancement of industrialization, these things are pretty common. We can make metals that have any property that we want. But the one thing that is hard to make is something that is hard to make. It's really hard to make something that other people can't make more of. And so if you look around at human history, you find that whatever is the hardest thing for people to produce ends up being used as money. And the examples of this are numerous. And the reason is simple. If everybody uses a form of money that is easy to produce, everybody buys it, and so everybody's storing their value in it. So the price of that thing goes up. But if it's easy to produce, the people who produce it will find a way of producing more of it, and that will bring the price down. So it will serve as a lousy store of value. And anything that serves as a lousy store of value will not be good for use as money. So if you look throughout history, you find that all these examples of money that we've had, the one thing they have in common is that at the time when they were used as money, they were hard to make. And when they stopped being hard to make, when we found ways of making them easily, they stopped being money. And that applies to beads, seashells, cattle, but also government money. If you compare different countries and their different currencies, the countries that have the countries that have money that is hard to produce, like the developed nations whose central banks do a relatively good job of maintaining the supply of money, their currencies are much more successful and they get adopted all over the world. Whereas third world countries generally who have central banks that increase the supply of money quite easily end up witnessing massive devaluation of their currency. And people in those countries will drop their currency and move on to other kinds of currencies, mainly gold or foreign currency. So what do all these things have in common? They are hard to make. That's the key point. So why Bitcoin matters, in my opinion, the most interesting thing about Bitcoin is that it is the hardest money ever invented. It's the hardest thing to ever make. Why? Because the supply of Bitcoin is strictly fixed. Okay? It's pre-programmed and it's, I wouldn't say impossible, but for all practical intents and purposes, we can assume that this monetary policy, this Bitcoin implementation that currently exists, will continue to exist. And you might be able to fork it, you are able to fork it, you can make other coins from it, but you can't stop this one from existing. I mean, we can argue about that maybe, but I mean, we're coming up on 10 years that Bitcoin has maintained this monetary policy and stuck to it. And that is an incredibly impressive track record because, no central bank is able to stick to its targets for 10 years. They change their targets all the time. But Bitcoin's monetary policy functions in that the supply increases asymptotically approaching 21 million. In other words, the growth rate in the gray is always declining. So we start off very high growth rate because the supply started from zero, and then it continues to drop, and then eventually the growth rate goes to zero around the year 2140 or something like that. So this makes Bitcoin unique from all and different from all other monetary assets that we've had ever invented. And the reason is, when something is chosen as a store of value, the fact that it gets chosen as a store of value will mean that other people will try and produce more of it. If you're storing your money in gold or in dollars,
The people who produce dollars or gold or copper or whatever it is will try and make more of it. It's just how it works. Except Bitcoin. If more people use Bitcoin as a store of value, it does not, it's not possible for others to produce more of it. Instead, people can mine more Bitcoin. There will be more mining, more resources will go towards mining Bitcoin, but the supply will not increase. Instead, what happens, if you understand how the difficulty adjustment with mining works, is that if more miners come to Bitcoin, the difficulty of mining will increase. In other words, the processing power that you need to produce one Bitcoin goes up. So essentially, the difficulty adjustment makes Bitcoin, ensures that Bitcoin remains the hardest money. It ensures that Bitcoin supply remains fixed. And that's why, in my opinion, the most interesting aspect of Bitcoin is this, and the key technical innovation that made Bitcoin work. I think the magic sauce of Bitcoin is the difficulty adjustment. If you look at pretty much all the technologies that are involved in Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto didn't invent cryptography, he didn't invent Merkle trees, he didn't invent any of those things. And we have many examples of digital currencies that existed before that employed most of these technologies. Sean's eCash and BitGold and so on. But what made Bitcoin, I think, work as opposed to all the other ones is the difficulty adjustment. The difficulty adjustment just made sure that no matter how many people use Bitcoin, the supply will continue to increase at a fixed rate. And the interesting thing about it is that not only does the supply not increase, but in fact, the security of the network increases because of the difficulty adjustment. In other words, it becomes more and more expensive to attack the network, more and more expensive to hack it, more expensive to falsify the record of transactions. And so this is what I like to call the all-conquering juggernaut positive feedback loop of economic incentives. How Bitcoin basically, is a black hole that has been eating everything around us for the last 9, 10 years, and our only option is to submit to it. It's because of that, basically. Demand for, if Bitcoin generates any demand as a store of value, this was true in 2009 when people were collecting it just as a novelty item on their hard disks, that raises the value of it. The value rises, or the price rises, that means mining it becomes more profitable, so people mine more. So then more processing power goes to mining, which effectively makes the network more secure and harder to attack. And then the harder to attack the network is, the more secure the network is, the longer it survives without getting attacked, without getting hacked, and that increases the confidence that people have in it and invites people to start buying more into it. In other words, increasing the demand for it as a store of value. It's really unique to Bitcoin because with everything else, demand for store of value happens, price rises, and then mining becomes more profitable. The next step is supply increases, which brings the price down, which would then reduce the demand. But with Bitcoin, this is really how I understand the astonishing growth in the value and the spread of Bitcoin over the last 10 years. It's because of this. It's because in monetary demand doesn't increase the supply of Bitcoin, it increases the security of Bitcoin. And that's an astonishing aspect of Bitcoin, which I find most fascinating. So how secure is Bitcoin? I forgot to update this every time I do it. This is outdated. But it's the hash rate keeps going up. The hash rate is about 4, maybe something like 6 million times the world's top supercomputer. It's about 4 trillion times the size of the processing power of your laptop. All this processing power is going towards the mining process, towards solving the proof of work. It's what you need in order to generate a new Bitcoin. It's what ensures that it's not easy for anybody to make more Bitcoins and to increase the supply of Bitcoin. And this is really, if you think about it, how secure Bitcoin is. It's now been, 10 years that it's been operational, and we've not had a single transaction get one single confirmation when it was invalid. And this is an astonishing technical achievement. We've not had one transaction go on the blockchain where the person who made it didn't have the balance necessary for it. And why is that? Because the cost of doing fraud on Bitcoin continues to become more and more expensive through the difficulty adjustment. So what we end up with is that we have a system that has no single point of failure. It has no single piece of critical hardware or infrastructure. It has no single critical individual or organization. Nobody in the world is essential for Bitcoin. Everybody is completely dispensable for it. Effectively, it can't really be stopped. It's just an algorithm that any computer in the world can join in, participate in every 10 minutes. It issues a new block, and anybody can join using any method of communication out there. You know, you can, your phone, your computer, or whatever you want. You can log on to the network, run the software. Every 10 minutes, you're part of the consensus of the next 10 block. And it's never confirmed a fraudulent transaction, as I was saying. So this is why I think Bitcoin is really interesting, because it's the hardest money that has ever been invented. And it is available worldwide for anybody with an internet connection. And it's voluntary. It doesn't need regulation, enforcement, or police to make it function. And perhaps most interesting for me as an economist is that it is what we call sound money. Because the definition in the Austrian School of Economics, the definition of what is sound money, is that it's money that is accepted on the market and valued on the market purely voluntarily. So people accept it at the value that they choose. You know, two people transact with that money, they are both happy with the terms of the transaction. Unsound money is money that is enforced at gunpoint. You know, the government tells you have to accept this at that moment. So historically, the best example of sound money is gold, because gold won its monetary role on the market. Nobody really forced it to be. Nobody forces anybody to accept gold as money. It was the market test that gave gold the role as money. Whereas government money in general is considered the opposite of sound money. So Bitcoin, because it has emerged, and this is an astonishing thing if you think about it, it's just a piece of software that has grown to gain monetary value purely voluntarily for people transacting on the internet. And it's grown to be more than $100 billion worth of coins in circulation, and billions of dollars of transactions every day taking place. It's quite an amazing achievement. So what is this thing good for? What is Bitcoin really good for? I think the most convincing, or the most obvious aspect of what Bitcoin does is that it functions as a store of value. And that is because it is the first strictly scarce liquid asset that we've ever invented. In other words, if you think about all the liquid assets that we could use as human beings, things like gold, copper, silver, all these things, they can be used as money and they can be used as assets. But the problem with them is that their supply is, well, it's not necessarily a problem, but the reality is that their supply is effectively not limited strictly. The limit on how much gold or silver or copper or anything we have is never how much we have of it on Earth, because the Earth is enormous. It's the diameter of Earth, I think, is about 12,000 kilometers. The biggest hole we've dug anywhere is 3 kilometers. So we've just scratched the surface of the Earth in search for metals and resources. And the limit on how much gold or silver or copper or oil or any of these things, the limit on how much of these things we'll ever have is not the limit on Earth, it's just how much time we dedicate to each one of them, as opposed to all the others. Because we could double our production of pretty much anything, but the reason we don't is that we value other things as well. So it's really how we value our time, how we allocate our time between different production sources that determines how much we have of everything. And that explains why we've never run out of anything. Nickel, zinc, gold, people have been digging for gold for thousands of years everywhere, and they keep finding more and more gold. And as we advance in technology, and as we dig deeper, we just keep finding more and more. So the limit on all of those things is always just how much time we dedicate to them. The only real scarcity is human time. And one of my favorite economists, a guy called Julian Simon, who passed away, he wrote a book called The Ultimate Resource. And he makes this point that the only thing that is truly scarce is human time. Because with human time, you can make more of anything, apples, oranges, fish, gold, copper, whatever it is that you want, we can grow more of it, we can find more of it, if we just dedicate time to it. The one exception to that today is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the only thing with human time that is scarce like human time. And so for me, this sounds like a very obvious match between the two. If you want to store the value produced in your time is scarce. Your time on Earth is scarce, it's limited. If you want to store the value that is produced with your time, your best bet is to store it in something that is hard to inflate, whose supply is hard to increase. And so Bitcoin is quite obvious as a choice in that regard because its supply is strictly fixed. So if you're buying one Bitcoin today, you're buying 1 out of 21 million of all the Bitcoins that will ever exist forever. Whereas, if you're buying $1 or a gold coin, there will always be more, and the supply of all of these things is always going to continue to increase. So this strict scarcity, I think, is a very interesting aspect of Bitcoin. And it's going to offer people the ability to store their value into the future without the inefficiency, the inevitable inefficiency that we've had all human history, which is that you store your value in something, then somebody makes more of it, and they take away your value without them having to have worked hard. You work hard, you earn $1,000, you store your value that you earned is $1,000, and somebody prints another, somebody doubles the supply of dollars, they've effectively stolen half of your wealth, as you can see in examples in places like Venezuela today. So having this available for everybody around the world, I think is going to be an amazing invention. Over time, I think this is going to offer people an excellent way of becoming more future-oriented and being able to think about the future much more because they can save their wealth in the future more securely. Secondly, I think what's really interesting here about Bitcoin is that it functions as a decentralized alternative to banking and central banking, particularly central banking. And the reason is, it's, if you think about it, what Bitcoin really represents, people, I think, misevangelized Bitcoin and misunderstood it initially in terms of it being a replacement for Visa or a replacement for MasterCard. And I think it does a very lousy job of doing that, but that doesn't mean that it's lousy because it's a replacement for something else. If you make a payment with Visa or MasterCard, you need confirmation within a second or two to get on with your life. But you also don't need a very, very secure level of confirmation. Fraud in small consumer payments is a cost that is going to be there, but it's a cost that is, we're willing to accept it because, it beats having to wait 30 days for your coffee before they serve you the coffee, or pay 30 days earlier for the coffee. So, the coffee place is willing to take the risk that there might be some credit card fraud in 1 out of 100 transactions and then socialize the cost on everybody. And so on both counts, Bitcoin is not useful in that regard because it doesn't offer you immediate confirmation, and its security is just overkill for these kinds of transactions. This one. Yeah. So so it's not very useful for consumer payments. But if you compare it to settlement payments between banks and between large financial institutions, well, then it's an incredibly compelling option because with Bitcoin you can send money from here to China with 6 confirmations in under an hour, and 6 confirmations is about as sure as we can be about anything in this world. Anything, Bitcoin transaction with 6 confirmations is an extremely certain thing. So you compare that to the other possibilities. If you wanted to send, $100 million from here to China, or if the U.S. central bank wants to settle with the Chinese central bank, the options in that case take longer and involve much more security risk and necessitate eventually the centralization of banking into central banking. So what Bitcoin offers us is the ability to have a decentralized option, not going through one central bank, which is in the case of the current banking system is the US central bank. We have a decentralized option that allows you to send money halfway around the world in less than an hour, and currently with transaction fees that are only a few cents each. So this is effectively a competitor to central banks. That's really a key point to think about it. And also, what we're seeing, another problem with the consumer model of Bitcoin, or understanding Bitcoin as a consumer payment vehicle, is that Bitcoin is going to have a very hard time scaling to a level that will allow it to handle all these transactions. Just simply the way that Bitcoin transactions work is that every single individual on the network needs to know what every single other individual has spent before they accept their payment. And that's just not going to be workable. It's not workable for each coffee shop to keep track of 7.5 billion people to make sure that you did not pay your Bitcoin to somebody else before you paid it to them. Instead, the way that Bitcoin is going to scale is that the Bitcoin transactions are going to be the more important, more valuable transactions, and the individual consumer payments are going to come on second layers. They're going to come on layers with less security than the on-chain transaction, but that's perfectly normal because you don't need the level of security that on-chain transactions provide for your coffee. And so the way that Bitcoin is scaling really is through an increase in the value of the transactions on-chain, not an increase in the number of transactions on-chain. And I think this is a very important distinction. So if you look at the number of transactions that are taking place on Bitcoin, we've sort of plateaued around 500,000 or 300,000 to about 500,000 transactions. We've reached a little bit of plateau over there, but but if you think of what happened at the end of 2017 when the transaction fees began to rise, is that exchanges, casinos, all the websites that use Bitcoin that use Bitcoin started settling more and more of their own in-house payments in their own ledger, and then only using Bitcoin's ledger for transactions that go from them or to and from their exchange or website. So for instance, if you have an account on a gambling website, initially when Bitcoin when Bitcoin transaction fees were cheap or free, every transaction on the casino would be registered on the Bitcoin blockchain. Now, as transaction fees became $1 or $5 during the end of 2017, that became completely impractical. And so the casino would have all of the transactions that you carry out on their website just registered with them. And then only when you send them money and only when you take money out, you get, does it register on chain. So effectively, this is the inspiration for the title of my book. What we're getting here is something very similar to the gold standard. If you think of how the gold standard functioned, when gold was money, we didn't all go around carrying gold coins in our pockets, or our ancestors didn't. It wasn't money in that everybody went around carrying gold coins, and every single transaction involved the movement of physical gold from one point to the other. Gold was put in vaults in banks, and for each movement of one gold coin from one bank to the other, physical movement of physical gold, you had maybe dozens or hundreds or maybe thousands of movements of pieces of paper backed by that gold, okay? And this is what is emerging with Bitcoin right now. The Bitcoin on-chain transaction is like moving physical gold. It's expensive, it's valuable, it's highly secure. It's a form of moving physical gold, effectively. It's a digital form, it's a digital version of moving physical gold, effectively. But you can have second and third layer transactions which are fully backed by gold, and these can be far more convenient, far easier. So this is what we're seeing right now. We're seeing more and more off-chain transactions, while the number of transactions on-chain has largely remained constant. And I think this is how Bitcoin is going to be scaling into the future, because I think it makes economic sense for this to be the way it works. So, this is the point. So, now, if we have the central bank alternative existing there, effectively you can think of it as the internet getting its own decentral bank. It's an alternative, instead of everybody in the world was stuck with their own central bank, now you can just exit onto the internet. You can go online and you can pay with the central bank of the internet or decentral bank of the internet, and it's an option available for everybody. And that economy, I think, is going to likely continue to grow because of the efficiency of settlement and the quickness of moving coins around the world as opposed to traditional finance, and also because it is hard money. It is harder money than the monies of governments, the monies of central banks. So it's a very strong competition. If it continues to survive, there are no technical failures in Bitcoin. It's a compelling alternative for many, many people, as we can see for the last 10 years as more and more people adopt it. So what does it mean if we have this new central bank that's there as an alternative? What would it do? And for me, these are the issues that got me into Bitcoin in the first place, why I was interested in it. I've always been fascinated with this topic of hard money versus easy money. And in particular, I think the most interesting aspect of it is the topic of time preference. Time preference refers to how much people discount the future compared to the present. So everybody prefers consumption or enjoyment of anything today rather than in the future, simply because you might die in the future, so you would rather have it today. So if I gave you the option of, $1 million today, or the same $1 million with the same purchasing power 1 year from now, everybody would take them today. The only way that you would accept to delay receiving the money is if I paid you a premium in real terms on it. That premium is the time preference. And the higher the premium that I have to pay you, the higher your time preference. In other words, the more you value the future, the more you value the present. So high time preference means you value the present a lot more. Low time preference means you value the present more, but not a lot more. You always value the present more, okay? So essentially, low time preference means future orientation, means thinking more and more about the future. And I think this is intricately linked to the money supply. Because when the money supply is easy, when money is easy to expand, what we end up seeing is that your money is going to lose value into the future. You're less likely to save in the money. And if you're less likely to save, you're more likely to borrow, you're more likely to get into debt. And therefore, economically, but also in all other aspects of decision making, your decision making becomes more present oriented than future oriented. On the other hand, if money is hard and you know that you can save your wealth and money into the future, you're more likely to store wealth in it, and then you're more likely to start thinking more and more of the future. So if we look at, for instance, saving rates across the Western economies over the last 50 years, almost 50 years, we see that since money was decoupled from gold is hard money, since national currencies were decoupled from gold in 1970, saving rates have been declining. The only country that has a savings rate that is relatively high is Switzerland, which was the last country to go off the gold standard. And it's still, up until a few years ago, it still continued to have the hardest money income. So people in Switzerland continue to save more because their money is more likely to hold value. So this, of course, is actually a common objection that people give to Bitcoin, which is that if the value of Bitcoin is going to rise, then nobody will spend. And if nobody will spend, then the economy will collapse and we will all die, and then children will die. And so if you like Bitcoin, clearly you hate children, right? And this is why we're all here, right? Everybody here hates children, right? Well, it's not exactly that way. Contrary to Keynesian fantasies, we don't hate children. Because, the economy is not going to crash if people are going to start thinking of the future. On the contrary, future orientation is what makes the economy function. And it's what allows us to accumulate capital. And so, the mechanism the Keynesians identified is correct, but they don't understand how prices function and how decision-making functions. So yes, if your money is going to gain value, you're more likely to think of the future, and you're less likely to spend it. But are you going to starve because you would rather have more food next year than this year? No, because if you starve, you die. So you still need food, you still need shelter, you still need clothes. You will still have to spend. It doesn't matter how much the money appreciates, you have to spend today or you will die. In other words, time preference is always positive. You're always going to want to spend today. But what hard money does is that at the margin, it shifts your decision making towards more saving and less consumption. So in other words, people will spend more, people will still spend, but they'll spend less frivolously, and that's really the key point. People will spend less frivolously on this. And the best example that I'd like to give is this hard drive from 1980, 10 megabyte hard drive, which cost $3,500. Why would anybody buy this in 1980 when they could just wait 30 years and buy it for a few cents? Right? Your phone, why do you buy your phone now? Just wait 2 years, you can get it for $50 instead of paying $500 or whatever you paid. And the answer is you need the phone today. If you wait 2 years, you go 2 years without the phone. It doesn't work like that. So if your money goes and increases in value, you're less likely to, say, spend on a frivolous phone that you don't need, spend on accessories that you don't need, but you're still going to buy capital goods that you need for your work. You're still going to try and increase your productivity by buying these things. And that's, this was not a stupid decision. People who bought this computer in 1980 might have ended up starting, being the people who started companies like Apple, and that worked out well for them, even though they paid it an enormous amount. So time preference is always positive, and people will still spend. But with hard money, you'll get higher savings. That's the difference. And that's a good thing. Savings are not bad. In the Keynesian way of understanding the economy, when people save money, that money disappears and that's it. Children go hungry because you refuse to spend your money. Essentially, that's how they view it. But if you save money, that money is going to be spent in the future. And not spending it today means that you're not consuming resources today, and that frees up those resources, capital goods and labor, from producing your consumption goods for consumption today. And instead, they can be dedicated towards producing capital goods for consumption tomorrow. And that effectively is the process of capital accumulation. And capital accumulation really is, it's essentially civilization. This is what human civilization is. We separate it from monkeys and from other animals in that we don't just go and hunt when we get hungry and that's it. Before we get hungry, we start thinking, instead of just spending all day hunting, I'm going to spend some time building a fishing rod or building a bow that I could use to catch rabbits, and that increases your productivity. So then you can catch rabbits with a lower amount of time, and then you can spend more time building a house, and then you can spend more time building a boat and increasing your productivity. And this is just the process of civilization. Generation after generation, people prioritizing the future, thinking of the future, working for the future, and accumulating more capital as a result. And as a result of that, getting to a point where we have the modern standard of living, where we have enormous amounts of capital available to every individual. And that's purely as a result of saving and delayed gratification. So it's a good thing to have a low time preference. It's not a bad thing. And I think, this is why I'm excited about seeing how Bitcoin is going to evolve, because I think it would have a fundamentally transformative impact on people and on societies in making us more long-term in our orientation, and not just in economic decisions, but also in all other aspects of decision-making. And my book gets into this in depth. My favorite chapter in the book is chapter 5 on time preference. And this is, I think, the summary of the book, if you want. This is your art on hard money. This is your art on easy money. And I think it's no coincidence that, with all of the technology and the machines that we have today, we still don't have anybody in the world producing anything like the Sistine Chapel, even though it would be far easier to produce today. Instead, what do our artists produce? These sort of things. So, I'm sure some people here are going to get upset because they like Mark Rothko. Tough. Still going to talk about him badly. The point is, you can like him, and there's a fetish for everything out there. That's perfectly fine. But the reality is, if you think about the time that it took to produce this versus the time that it took to produce this, it's an enormous difference. There's a poem by Michelangelo that I quote in the book, where he talks about just how terrible it was for him to be able to produce this. 4 years he was hanging from that ceiling, little food, little sleep, just trying to get it done as fast as possible, as good as possible. And it took him 4 years, and it also took him a lifetime of learning skills in order to be able to develop that. This here requires no skill and requires about 15 minutes to finish. You don't need to train to do this. You can find any 10-year-old kid, give them a bucket of yellow paint and a bucket of red paint, show them this and tell them reproduce it, and they will reproduce the same exact thing. It requires no talent, it requires no time. And that's, I think, an enormously significant thing, because you can only have a culture that produces things like that if people have future orientation. Michelangelo was somebody who was building art because he'd spent all this time on it because he wanted to survive hundreds of years. And the people who financed him to build this also wanted it to survive for 500 years and maybe more. But here, this was just, it's an assembly line. It's churning out things that take 15 minutes to produce, and then it's just about artists getting together and deciding, this is good, this is art. Fine, if you like it, that's fine, but don't pretend that this is comparable to that one in the effort that it takes. And I think it's quite telling that if you read an amazing book by Jack Barzoum called From Dawn to Decadence, he talks about art and culture and politics, and he identifies a period of the beginning of decadence in art and culture as being 1914, which is not coincidentally is the same year at which almost all the world went off the gold standard and went into government money. That's when decision-making for people started to shift towards the short term. Sounds crazy, but if you read it, I think if you read the chapter in my might sound a little bit less confusing, possibly. In terms of innovations, in terms of technological innovation, we like to think of technology today as being the best. It is the best, of course, but in terms of the things that make our life good and the innovations that we have, most of the important things that define the 20th century were actually invented in the 19th, and in the 20th we just added onto them. And it's, yeah, I get into this in more detail. So essentially, civilization is built by low time preference people operating with sound money. Civilization is destroyed by people with high time preference who prioritize the present and consume the capital stock instead of accumulating and adding onto it. And so Bitcoin, I think, my view is that it's going to take us back towards a world of more long-term orientation, because people will understand the value of the long term. And I really look forward to seeing the cultural and social impacts that it's going to have on us as a society. Another aspect of it is, I've gone on for a little too long. I'm going to just skip through the rest of the slides quickly, and then we can discuss them in more detail in Q&A. Limited government, taking away the printing press from the government, which allows the government to essentially finance itself without limitation, is, I think, going to be enormously transformative politically. And more and more economic production is going to become digital and informational rather than physical, and that's going to reduce the importance of government's territorial monopoly. In other words, the way that I think of it is that we're going to see the world become more and more like Switzerland. Switzerland is a country that practically has very little government. They, they don't have a foreign policy. The government hardly does anything. Now they're becoming more like other European countries, but 30, 40 years ago, they were extremely limited. And the consequence of it was they're one of the richest, most prosperous, most peaceful societies in the world. I think that's no coincidence. And the alternative is that family, local community is what becomes more and more influential and important in these societies rather than the government controlling them. And so this is in terms of politically. Economically, effectively, we can think of hard money as being the solution to all of the problems that Keynesian economists tell us are just inherent features of capitalism. Inflation just happens, we don't know why. Recessions just happen because, animal spirits or something or the other. Unemployment happens, and, we're just there to fight it. And in reality, the only reason these things are possible is because of easy money, it's because of inflation. If you're interested in reading about that, you should check out chapter 7 in my book for a more detailed explanation. But for now, all I'm going to do is just show this chart of Switzerland. This was Switzerland under the gold standard up until the mid-70s. They practically had no unemployment at all. This was when, there was no inflation. The value of their currency was going up all the time compared to other currencies, and there was no unemployment. Hard money does that to you. And now, since the 90s, they sold half their gold, and now their currency is just like any other currency. As you see, they get all the joys of regular, continuous, ever-present unemployment, as well as, the devaluation of the currency. Those two things go together. And the current perspective that it's actually the other way around, that you have to, that there's a trade-off between inflation and unemployment, I think is absolutely not true, because here they have inflation and unemployment, here, no inflation, no unemployment. And the reason is hard money, really. And then finally, just getting rid of this monster that is the foreign exchange market, which I think is an enormous technological regression. If you think about it, one of the crowning achievements of humanity in the 19th century was that the whole world was using one currency, one money. You could trade all over the world with gold, and the price of everything everywhere was expressed in gold. And it's astonishing that we've gone back technologically now to a system of international partial barter. If you want to buy something from Canada, Canada's not far from here, you can't just buy it. You have to first buy their currency and then buy it, which is an enormous inefficiency, and inefficiency in terms of transaction costs, but more importantly, inefficiency in terms of calculation. If you're running a business today, your inputs are coming from several countries with different currencies, and your outputs are going to several countries with different currencies. And your balance sheet is, it's like trying to build a house with a measuring tape that is expanding and contracting with temperature. The value of the currencies that you're using are going up and down. So businesses can go out of business even though they have a good business model, just because the currency of the country from which they buy things has gone up, or the currency to the country where they export has gone down, and that puts you out of business. And it's an enormous, it's the cause of all these trade problems and all these, trade becoming a geopolitical issue is a function of this. And if Bitcoin can help us get rid of that, I think it'll be a wonderful achievement. And of course, separating the monetary policy of one country from being the global monetary unit, I think is also going to be enormously beneficial. So effectively what we have is a free market in money, savings, capital, and investments. We don't have those things. All of these things are essentially government monopolies now. And Bitcoin is probably our best bet at building a free market alternative to these government-controlled entities. That's basically it. And this is my book, and if you'd like to contact me, this is my email. Thank you very much.
All right, we're going to do a Q&A, and I'd like to do this by having people come up and form forward of the line, and questions at the microphone here. If you have a question, come up.
How you doing, Saif today? I just want to say two things. I haven't actually read your book, although I've consumed your material, and I agree with most of your general thesis, except for technologically how block space is used.
I'm sorry.
Technologically how block space is used, I think looking at second layers like Lightning and more importantly channel factories, the kinds of capital flows between banks are actually very predictable except for changes in the general market economy. The bank flows between financial institutions, I think, are generally predictable except for changes in market conditions on longer time horizons. So I think that a lot of the activity as far as settling between custodial institutions can actually happen on second layers and therefore kind of keep the actual use of block space itself efficient enough to have it cost effective both for institutions and individuals with low time preference. And I just like kind of my own discipline is like how the actual net settlement between institutions has happened. And I'd like to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
That's an interesting question, actually. That's an interesting question. But the way that I see it is that, at the end of the day, every one of us is going to be existing and transacting mostly with people in repetitive settings, repetitive transactions. So, you eat from the restaurants in your neighborhood and you both bank at the same bank. And so eventually, it just makes sense for you not to defraud your bank and for the restaurant not to defraud the bank and for the bank not to defraud you and for the three of you to essentially have a system where you trust one another. Where we need this trustless nature of Bitcoin transactions is for, your bank, your local bank with another bank. If they're going to be, different political jurisdictions, far from each other, not many repetitive transactions, this is where the value of trustlessness in Bitcoin, I think, is more valuable. So the way that I would see it is that, consumer payments and things that don't require a lot of security will migrate off-chain. And the way that I see it is that it will just continue to, the value of the transactions on it will continue to rise until effectively we get to a point where it's the most important transactions, the most valuable transactions in the world that settle on-chain. And then everything else settles off-chain. This is how I would see it. Because, if you think your own transaction is valuable enough, you can always pay for it yourself, but it's just, it's not going to be economical when you're competing with institutions that want to use that block space, which is limited, very scarce. Somebody wants to send millions of dollars to China is going to be willing to pay much more than you sending money to your friend across town, So I think it's just natural that they're going to keep bidding up the price of the block space until the transaction fee is going to price out everything but the most secure transactions. And then the way that I see it is that, this doesn't mean people won't use Bitcoin, because people it's not like the alternatives offer you something as good as Bitcoin on-chain transactions. The alternatives are dollar off-chain transactions, effectively. And so, given the choice between dollar off-chain transactions and Bitcoin off-chain transactions, I think Bitcoin has a good chance of continuing to grow and get more and more demand, even on second layer, because it's hard-earned money. It's going to be attractive to more and more people over time. So that's how I would say it.
Hello, my name is Dan, and I'm a member of YM Hub. First, a little bit my background about Bitcoin. The first time I heard about the Bitcoin junk mail, it was like $2. And then the next time I heard it was from Peter Schiff. I was thinking about 600 is like crazy, But my question here is that the Bitcoin, I think one of the arguments Peter Schiff raised was I think it's valid. How do you, basically the Bitcoin, his argument is that Bitcoin is like out of nowhere, there's no cost. Well, in production, later production cost is different, but Bitcoin is based on your trust, your confidence on that stuff. But how do you compare between Bitcoin and Sitcoin? I mean, another Bitcoin, maybe different brand of Bitcoin. I mean, it sounds like a different brand of Bitcoin can easily perform all the functions with real Bitcoin. And as long as you can put your trust on that Sitcoin or Bitcoin. So that's his strongest argument, which I kind of agree with that. My second question is that sounds like the government, if they want, they can easily kill the Bitcoin at the final transaction level. I mean, for example, the overstock.com, they sell furniture, all that kind of things. They can accept Bitcoin, but if the government regulate that all Americans business cannot accept Bitcoin, nobody can really, get the real stuff from the Bitcoin, at least in that particular region. That's my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first question, I think Bitcoin, you can't really compare it to the other coins because Bitcoin's really proven over a very long period of time that nobody controls it. Nobody can change it. Nobody can change the monetary policy. This is why, for me, I think, you can't really compare it to the rest of them because all the rest of them, and the onus of proof is not on me to prove it. The onus of proof is on them to show that, their monetary policy can't be altered. But in fact, with pretty much any of the coins, it's quite trivial for people to change the monetary policy. And that means that effectively you're replacing the government central bank with a central bank made up with some programmers. And, there's a reason that every other kind of monetary system has failed over time and gold continues to survive because gold is the only one that nobody controls. And so Bitcoin is the only one that reproduces gold's properties. If you look at all the other coins, it's quite trivial for them to change the money supply, the way that I would see it. So this is why I think it's not similar to the others, and it's not, the idea that, making more coins is going to devalue Bitcoin, I think is not really true because they are not fungible. You can't use Bitcoin to pay on Ethereum or Ethereum to pay on Bitcoin. And if you're looking for trustless digital cash with an immutable monetary policy, there's only one. There are no alternatives to it. Your second question in terms of shutting it down, it's a very complicated question. We don't know what would happen, how things would happen, whether governments can or will shut it down, whether they would even want to, or whether their interest is to shut it down or to use it. The thing is, you have to understand that technology imposes its own reality on the world in that, the example that I like to give is gunpowder. When gunpowder was invented, governments didn't go around and say, okay, we're going to ban gunpowder so that we continue to fight with our swords. We want to keep it real, just only use swords, fight with one another. And if you use gunpowder, we are going to stab you with our swords because it's not nice of you. So that, we won't let you compete with our army with gunpowder. Any government that did that was taken over by governments that were using gunpowder. So I think it's more likely that governments and individuals, and I think more specifically individuals who make up governments, thinking of their own self-interest, I think they're going to want to utilize Bitcoin rather than ban it. And if you look at where Bitcoin is today in the US, I think we've reached the point where Bitcoin has become like corn or any of these industries that has a strong lobby in DC, which is just always going to prevent anything. I mean, not necessarily always, but we're reaching a point where, you know, the majority of people don't care about Bitcoin, but a small minority are really motivated by it. So if you go to Congress and you say, I want to ban Bitcoin, all that you're doing is you're losing the support of a small percentage of people, and that's going to hurt your chances for re-election. There's a small motivated minority, and the way democracy works is that the small motivated minority gets its way. That's in terms of whether they will. Now, whether they could, I think is a very different question. Whether they can ban it or not, I mean, I have a big discussion of this in my book. Generally, I'm skeptical of it for the simple reason that, you know, you can ban things, you can pass laws, but you can't change the economic incentives that will make people want to go after it. So you look at the Soviet Union, you know, they tried to ban everything and control everything from jeans to all sorts of things, and now Soviet Union is gone and Russians are wearing jeans normally. It's, you know, it's a technology, it's convenient, people like to wear jeans, and if you try and make it so that your government wants to ban jeans, you're just making it more likely that your government is going to go out of business and jeans will survive, you know? That's how I would see it.
Before we go on to the next question, pizza is here, so we're going to continue the Q&A, but feel free to help yourself with some pizza.
Feel free to help yourself with some pizza.
Hey, how's it going, man? Nice to meet you. My name is Matt. I have two questions. I just recently finished my master's in finance at school in South Chicago, and the assistant professor at the university. I had a lot of battles with my economic professors. I've been researching Bitcoin for about 3.5 years, and I felt like our curriculum was very outdated. And I've always been struggling to maybe push them to teach other people about Bitcoin and decentralized assets. How is your curriculum different at your university is in terms of business for your economic modules, stuff like that? And then my second question would be, when you're talking about Switzerland and that period of sort of zero inflation, zero unemployment, I can't remember if you mentioned it in the book, but why is it that they went off that after seeing so many decades of craziness, of recession, different things like that that you mentioned in that book? And obviously they were quite forward thinking with currency over hundreds of years. And why is it that they went off that?
Okay, so let me just begin with the second question. I highly recommend a book called Gold Wars if you're interested in this. It's specifically about this topic. It's the battle for gold as money from a Swiss perspective. You know, it's not a simple answer, but I think the underlying reason is just that when Switzerland and a few other countries were still using gold as money, it's a massive threat to all the governments that are using, that are printing inflationary money, because people in Europe and in the US will just keep buying more Swiss francs, and that drives the price of the Swiss franc further up, and brings down the price of the US dollar. And so, you know, if we had a free market competition between governments, where, you know, every government is free to set the monetary policy at once, you would find that eventually, you know, the Swiss franc would eat all the other currencies and they would all collapse. So Switzerland is still a country after all, and so the US and other countries would bring pressure onto it politically to do what it's doing. And it's the same thing that they're doing right now. You know, the Swiss central bank is buying stocks in major in all the major stock markets. Why? Because they need to keep inflating their currency to prevent their currency from appreciating significantly compared to the euro, because otherwise everybody in Europe would drop their euro and go to Switzerland, which is what was happening up until 2011 or so. Your first question in terms of the curriculum, yeah, the way I like to express it is that the difference between Keynesian and Austrian economics is like the difference between astrology and astronomy. And they both tentatively talk about stars, but they have different questions, different answers, different uses. Of course, your opinion on which is astronomy and astrology depends on your opinion of economics and your opinion of astrology and astronomy. But, you know, I think the metaphor is valid, that they're quite different. Majority of universities teach Keynesian stuff, but I think, you know, with time, its explanatory power is dropping, and people are going to start
thinking of alternatives. I think my next book, my plan is to write a textbook in economics, because we don't have an alternative to the mainstream textbook. And we do, but they're pretty old, from the 50s. I think the best example is Man, Economy and State by Murray Rothbard, but that's about a 1,500-page book, so it's not easy. So I'd love to maybe help make an alternative. And I think with time, particularly hopefully because of Bitcoin, it's going to drive more and more people towards being interested in researching Austrian economics, and so more universities will teach it.
It seems like a big part of your thesis is based on the immutability of Bitcoin, but I think that these protocols have evolved over time and will need to evolve in the future, for example, with the advent of quantum computing and other challenges. And one topic that I think would be interesting to discuss is the governance process. With Bitcoin, I perceive the governance process as being more of a technocratic council or a UASF type of governance. What is your opinion of the benefits of that versus on-chain governance?
I think, it's sort of misunderstanding of the governance of Bitcoin to think that that Bitcoin is governed by a Bitcoin core, because the reality is every node operator governs their own node. And that's really the wonderful thing about it, in that, Bitcoin Core, all that they can do is put software out there, but you have to download it and run it. And if you don't want to download it, you don't want to run it, nobody can force you to do it. And so in terms of the immutability, why immutability matters to me is not because of the technical issues, it's specifically because of the monetary policy. And so essentially, as long as you want to stick to the 21 million, you can. And nobody can stop you. And there's absolutely nothing that the core developers can do. They can change the code, but you don't have to do it. You can continue with your own. And there are people who run implementations of Bitcoin that are not produced by Bitcoin Core, and they're perfectly compatible with the network. So I think, the economic consensus around a limited supply is, first of all, very strong because you control your own node. And secondly, it's also very strong because the people who got into Bitcoin because of this, or at least a lot of them did. A lot of early adopters were interested in it because of the limited money supply. So it's highly unlikely that this intransigent little minority is going to be dislodged on this issue. And even if it were, it's still your node at the end of the day. So, Bitcoin Core could fork, and they could start a new Bitcoin with an increasing supply. But, Bitcoin itself, with the fixed supply, continues to be there.
Look, in your book, you give an overview of the Austrian theory of the business cycle, where the boom and bust cycle of the economy is caused by manipulation by the central banks. And I think for a lot of Bitcoiners, we see the waves of adoption and price increase followed by the bear markets that follows, kind of a similar process. I'm just wondering, is that, of course, there's no central bank for Bitcoin. So I'm wondering, is the boom and bust in Bitcoin a fair analogy to the boom and bust in the general business cycle? And if so, what's the difference that would explain that in relation to the Austrian theory?
That's a very good question. But the way that I look at it is that, as long as, Bitcoin right now is maybe less than 1%, or maybe less than 0.5% of the global money supply, or 0.1% or something like that. So Bitcoin is not the currency with which we're measuring value. Bitcoin is not the driver of the business cycle. Bitcoin is just another speculative asset within the business cycle. So because we have easy money, and because we have money whose value and supply fluctuates with monetary policy, we have these bubbles in housing, in stocks, in everything, and Bitcoin is an example of them. But the difference between Bitcoin and all the others, and this is why, I think Bitcoin is really different, is that, so you'll get a bubble in housing, and like you saw 10 years ago, maybe we're seeing right now, and the result is the price of houses rises a lot. So what happens? People start building a lot more houses. You get a bubble in stocks. People start speculating too much in stocks, and the price of the stocks rises above the fundamental value of the revenue that they generate. So anything can be, anything in which a bubble forms will be overproduced, except Bitcoin. That's what's interesting about it. So it's going to continue to go from bubble to bubble. But I think the difference is that with each crash, it doesn't crash all the way back down to 1 cent. So we've gone so many bubbles so far, but this one will fall back to a higher level than the previous one because of the scarcity. And so this is why, I mean, you could, maybe we're going to get another 100 of these bubbles, but after a certain point, if they continue, I'm not saying this will necessarily happen, but if this just continues, then then we get the real flow, which is when we stop running the economy on dollars and we start running it on Bitcoin. That's how to think about it, I think.
I'm going to start by following up on that. It seems to me that the big difference here is going to be that, as you say, if we adopt Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are actual money, you don't get these booms and busts that you see induced by central banks, because you don't have that manipulation. It's actually not possible. I like your talk until you said that you wanted to abolish the FX market. Not only self-serving because I'm a currency investor, but because it seems inconsistent with things you've said previously in your talk. Here's what I would be curious about you clarifying. Sound like an economist that would have read some Frederick Hayek, possibly you read Denationalization of Money from the 1970s, and he talks about currency competition. I think that, in my mind, is what's so interesting about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies coming on board. And what I would foresee in a world like that is more of an FX exchange. People will be speculating because that is the way to find a fair price between the currencies. You can only abolish the FX market by monopoly of money, and as we know, monopolies can only be enforced by government control. So there you need a lot of government control to actually see to it that happens. So how do those views of the future actually square?
No, I think actually it's the other way around. The way that I would see it is that in a free market, you have free market competition, and I think I support the idea that let's have a free market in money, but I think there will only be one winner of this. And the example, metaphor, we've had this before, which is in the 19th century. So beginning of the 19th century, gold, silver, copper, and many places use seashells and so on. But then as transportation and industrialization advanced and technology spread all over the world, by the end of the 19th century, everybody was in gold. And that was not a monopoly. Governments adopted gold because they had to. They didn't force, they didn't force the choice of the market. The market forced the choice on them. And that's just, I think, an inevitable outcome in the free market competition of money. I don't know how to interpret that book by Hayek. I've read it, but I'm not a big fan of his work in the 1970s in this regard. One way of thinking of it is that it was a political attempt in that he argued, this is going to sound good because in the 70s, ideas of free market were beginning to make a comeback. And so he said, let's have a free market in currency. But maybe he knew that if we do have a free market in currencies, we're going to end up with one winner, which is, I think, gold back then. But I think it's inevitable that the winner will be one, because the benefits from joining the bigger currency are always bigger than the benefits of joining the second currency. And so people are always going to go towards the bigger one. And so that's just the winner-take-all market, more than any other one. And there are really no reasons why you would expect any other form of money to survive. In fact, the only reason that silver survived is money. In my book, I discussed this. Silver was only money up until 1870. And after 1870, many people don't want to admit this yet, and they still think that silver is money, but really it hasn't. Silver is the original analog shitcoin, basically. Since 1870, what happened was, up until 1870, it was useful to use silver as money because for smaller payments, you couldn't cut gold into very tiny grams. It's not convenient, so you use silver. But then in 1870, Germany switched to the gold standard because then you didn't need silver anymore because the gold wasn't moving anyway. You were just using financial instruments backed by the gold. So you could make financial instruments at any size you want, any value you want, and therefore there was no longer any reason for silver. And so the countries that tried to stay on silver paid a very heavy price, particularly China and India. The underdevelopment of China and India in the 20th century is highly linked, in my opinion, in the fact that they stayed on silver very late. Because the value of silver, after Germany switched, most economies were already on gold, but then when Germany switched, that's it. That was the sort of knockout blow, because all the major economies became on gold, and then all the smaller ones started to follow, and then the price of silver collapsed. So until 1870, it was around 12 to 1, the ratio silver to gold ratio. Since then, now it's about 70 or something like that. So silver has just crashed continuously since then. And it's now become an industrial metal. I don't think it plays any role as a monetary metal. And I think, I welcome the idea of currency competition, and and that means national shitcoins as well as developers producing their own shitcoins. I just know where my bets are. And we will find out. Time will tell.
Hi, Saif, big fan of the book. I'm curious to know if you are familiar at all with John Nash's concept of ideal money and/or Maynard Keynes' Bancor proposal, and how Bitcoin might relate to that and/or build off it.
Yeah, I don't think these are. So the Bancor proposal was the idea that the IMF or something like the IMF would issue this new currency, and then all the central banks would back it by it. And it's hocus pocus of moving the inflation from the national level to a supranational level. But then who decides, who prints the money, who controls the IMF? It's not going to be any different from the current system we have. The SDR could be something similar to it. But the US still controls the IMF, and so the US will control monetary policy, and so it's just like you're using the dollar. You just found a new name for the dollar. So I don't find it to be interesting. It doesn't matter what the name of the money is. What matters is who can increase the supply, who can change the supply, who can change the production of this coin. Really, that's really the only thing that matters. And so Keynes's proposal, like everything that Keynes proposed, involves people sitting in an office taking decisions for the better of everybody. It's just the same thing as the central banking model, but on a global scale. And I think if we do get something like that, it would not be able to compete with Bitcoin. Why would you want to trust a bunch of people when you can just trust math? It's a much more reliable thing, and also because if they do succeed in it, they will abuse it. History shows us people always abuse their ability to print money. So I wouldn't bet on it. Nash's proposal is sort of similar in that we have this ideal money, and then central banks would target their inflation rate to approach that ideal money's inflation rate, and then all of the central banks would tend towards it. Okay, cool, but next step is that if we do have that, you have this ideal money, and then you have the ideal money plus central bank risk. Which would you rather use? I think we're going to see people move more and more towards the ideal money itself, and so we'll have Bitcoin as the money, and then we'll have 100% reserve-backed instruments and currencies or whatever. But I don't see the value, and I don't see how governments can enforce that. We're going to target Bitcoin's inflation rate, but you can't use Bitcoin. We're going to use ours. This is what I really don't see, and it doesn't really solve the trust problem, because okay, we're using your government money, but then what if you increase the supply by a faster rate? What if you change the inflation rate? That stuff will happen. Governments will find excuses to inflate, always, whether it's a war or building hospitals for children or whatever it is. There's always a good reason to increase the money supply, and there's just no better way. There's no more reliable technology for opting out of that than Bitcoin itself. That's the way that I would see it.
Hey, Saif, thanks for coming and doing the talk. Based on your travels and living internationally, and assuming that Bitcoin does end up becoming a global currency, are there places around the world that you visited or that you're paying attention to that are really setting up their area, their country for successful adoption of Bitcoin? Like which countries do you think are going to be the big winners moving forward in this?
I don't know, it's a tough question to answer. It's still, anywhere you go, it's still a very small fringe community everywhere. Maybe in Central Europe, I think there's a lot of startups and a lot of activity on it, on Bitcoin. I don't know, I could be wrong, but just the impression that I had from being in Switzerland and Austria. But there's also the situation, one way to think of it is that the countries that are suffering the worst from currency crisis will be the ones that would adopt Bitcoin faster. But the more that I think about it, the more that I think it's just, this sort of question itself is not going to be relevant because Bitcoin is not going to be adopted on a national level. It's going to be adopted on an individual level. And so, it's, people with all over the world are going to be using Bitcoin, and then more and more and more people. If Bitcoin grows, this is how I see adoption spreading. I don't really think, I don't think the government, central bank adopting Bitcoin as a reserve currency is quite likely, because I think, governments, first of all, governments all love inflation. So even though China and Russia and Iran might not like the dollar and they would like to have an alternative to the dollar, they don't really not like the dollar enough to deprive themselves of the option of inflating their own currency. So, the Chinese, the Iranian, and the Russian governments would have to really limit themselves if they move to a Bitcoin standard. And so I don't really see that happening for that primary reason. And for the second reason, because of U.S. geopolitical pressure. It's not just going, the U.S. is not going to sit around and let other countries, central banks adopt it. So the way that I see it is that it's an alternative system that's going to grow in parallel to central banks on individuals, and it's not going to matter whose passports are more represented in Bitcoin. It doesn't matter. On the blockchain, your passport doesn't count for anything effectively.
Thank you. I read your book. I thought it was great. I do have some concerns, though, more about the long term, and I was wondering what your thoughts on that were. So right now, things have been going well, but the increase in supply is still 4% per year, and that, in my opinion, makes Bitcoin sort of elastic. As Bitcoin becomes less elastic because you get a supply increase of 0.5% and lower, do you think its volatility might increase? And if it does, do you think we could ever see Bitcoin become the stable coin?
Yeah, I don't think I'm not sure the elasticity of the supply itself is that significant, because I think what drives the volatility is the volatility of demand. And so, the supply is largely predictable, but it's the volatility in demand that changes every 5 minutes and makes the price move along as volatile as it is. But I think in the long run, what we're likely to see is that if the rate of adoption grows, if the percentage of Bitcoin's share of the global money market rises, then individual transactions are less likely to matter. Now we're at a point of one billionaire decides he wants to get into Bitcoin. That's going to move the markets all over the world. But if the size of the Bitcoin market and the size of the daily liquidity pool from which people are buying and selling is enormous, people are trading, say, $500 billion worth of Bitcoin every day, or $5 trillion worth of Bitcoin every day, all over the world, then it's unlikely these transactions will cancel out. And as we move towards that, as Bitcoin grows, the scale for another moon, if you want, disappears. Eventually, once you get on the moon, there's no more moons left to go to. And so then, people won't be buying Bitcoin as a speculative asset. They'll be holding it as money, like gold. And so then, the variation in people's demand for a hard asset like gold is far smaller than the variation of the demand for a speculative instrument. So I think it's just about a matter of time, possibly. As long as Bitcoin continues to operate successfully, it's just going to increase in value, and the liquidity will increase, and then with time, the volatility will start declining.
Thank you.
Hi. My question is about proof of work. Is proof of work, the way it is now, essential to the economics behind Bitcoin, or is it more technical, under the hood kind of implementation?
It's absolutely essential, because it is the way that Bitcoin remains hard money. I mean, by tying the creation of Bitcoin to a proof of work and by tying the adding of blocks onto the blockchain to proof of work, you make it extremely expensive for people to do this. And because it is extremely expensive, it becomes not likely that people will increase the supply or defraud the transactions. So it's a genius system because it's the only way that is reliable about it we found for doing those things, because it's just pure economic incentives. If you want to make Bitcoin register a false transaction, you just need to keep paying a lot of money, a lot of costs, and it's the cost of lying is far higher than the cost of detecting the lie and kicking you out of the network. And if you remove that, if you find a cheap way of doing proof of work, we're back to playing politics, whether it's my transaction that's correct or it's your transaction that's correct. And Bitcoin is, it's just economic incentives, and that's essential for it. So I can't see it removed or replaced.
Hi, Saif. Thank you for coming to the bottom unit in Chicago. It's great to have you here. You spoke earlier about Switzerland moving on from the gold standard because of peer pressure. So we know, well, relatively well understood that when gold turned into paper, and paper was traded, it was rehypothecated, and you can do shenanigans with it, like naked short selling to control the price. So even though it is a hard money, it can be manipulated in terms of the global market due to the fact that it's mostly paper at this point. Can you talk about your opinion on how shenanigans like that, like naked short selling, could apply to Bitcoin, or is it resistant to that?
It's a very interesting question. My personal view on this, I could be wrong, I'm not entirely made my mind up on this, but the way that I see it is the way that gold is manipulated is not necessarily, or at least it's not because of the short selling, or the reason, or put it another way, the reason that if the short selling is the reason, the deeper reason for the manipulation is the confiscation of gold. So in the 1930s, in the US and in all major economies, governments confiscated people's gold and they centralized it in the central banks. And one fact I mentioned in the book, which very few people seem to talk about, is that today, central banks in the world have far more gold than they ever did under the era of the gold standard. And that's really how gold's monetary role is played today. In other words, when central banks are able to hold about a sixth of all the gold that is out there, they are able to effectively neuter its monetary role by preventing their citizens from using it as money. But they still use it as money. They still hold a lot of gold. They still use gold as money. So I think I'm not saying it's impossible with Bitcoin, but I think that the whole rationale behind Bitcoin and the whole reason that it was made the way it was with all this very sophisticated design is precisely to make it decentralized and to make it hard to capture. So, we could have built a far more efficient, easier, cheaper alternative to Bitcoin based on physical gold, like eGold, which was built in the 90s, where, you have a big pile of gold somewhere owned by people who have apps on their phones, and then you send the ownership of the physical gold to one another. You don't need proof of work, you just have one guy. And I think the market, just like market provides everything, there will be people who will do that as an honest business. The problem with it is that governments will shut it down. And so the reason Bitcoin made this all proof of work, highly sophisticated, highly distributed system is precisely so that instead of having one central bank handling the settlement per country or for the world, as we have right now with physical forms of money, you have a far more decentralized system where you have thousands of nodes all over the world. So that if you go after individual node operators, others can pop up everywhere and the system continues to survive. So this is really the strength that I think, and the difference that separates Bitcoin from gold, which is that gold's clearance has to be centralized, and therefore it was relatively easy in the 1930s for governments all over the world to take all the gold their citizens and give them paper instead of it. I think it would be much harder with Bitcoin. But you know, I don't know, we'll see.
Hey, Saif. From a libertarian perspective, do you think Bitcoin should be the rallying point, so to speak, in terms of the solution to solve multiple issues, personal freedom, monetary policy? Should it be the spot where all libertarians from multiple viewpoints can all come together for the solution?
I mean, I'm not. I think Bitcoin is an economic reality. So I don't really see the point behind, say, political organization behind it. I think, you know, it's this. The problem with gold, in terms of trying to maybe stall the gold standard, is that you have to convince people and you have to win elections and governments. And you know, if you've dealt with people, you know how terrible that thing can be. Bitcoin is just, you know, we don't need to ask anybody anymore. There's no point behind it, and you know, I think even the political activism on Bitcoin is probably futile. It's economic reality that's going to impose itself, whether people go around evangelize for it as a political solution or not. I mean, I think it's useful to obviously talk to people and explain to them what's going on, but you know, I don't think Bitcoin. Actually, let's put it this way: if Bitcoin needed us to go evangelize and organize politically and run elections and have candidates in office for it to win, then it won't. So I think if it's going to win, it's going to win because of its scarcity. It's just, you know, people put a little bit of money and they watch it go up, and then they put a little bit more and then watch it go up. So if the system continues to work, the economic reality of it, I think, will continue to impose itself. And you know, there's probably better uses of your time than trying to rally politically for Bitcoin, I would say. Okay. Can we just, maybe this will be the second last question, so that we can sign the books and get to chat personally, and we can sit down? Yes.
It seems like your focus has been around the application as a virtual, as a currency, rather than the other parts about Bitcoin, like the network or the protocol and stuff like that. Is there other stuff that you have also looked into that you're interested in besides the currency of Bitcoin?
I've looked into a lot of stuff, but you know, I think it's really Bitcoin is all we get. A currency and a payment system, that's it. And this is what this thing is useful for. I've heard so many supposed applications of blockchain technology over the years. I'm not convinced any of them make any economic sense. I think they're, you know, it's cargo cult engineering, where you know you follow the rituals of something and you hope that it gives you the result. But it's, I think, yeah, it's nothing really suggests that this should have any other uses. And you know, we've had nutcrackers for about 2,000 years. We've had nutcracker technology for 2,000 years. And in 2,000 years, what has nutcracker technology been used for? Nutcracking. That's it. And you know, for 2,000 years, it's worked great. You know, we crack nuts all the time, and they work. And nobody goes around saying, you know, nutcracker technology is going to revolutionize milkshakes, or it's going to revolutionize something else. You know, you could make a milkshake with a nutcracker, but there are much better ways of making a milkshake. And I think that's what ends up happening with all of these blockchain technology applications. I don't see any one of them that could benefit from this, from the structure, which was, you know, it was engineered and designed to build Bitcoin. So, you know, I don't, you know, engineers don't just glue things randomly and see what happens. There are reasons it was built that way, and there are reasons it's not ideal for other things because it wasn't built for them. And that's how I would see it.
All right, last question.
Thank you again for taking the time to answer the questions and giving the talk. My question is, what kind of challenges, the economical, technological, do you think would prevent Bitcoin to become economically important, such as gold value?
Yeah, and in my book, there's a section called How to Kill Bitcoin. And I go through many of the scenarios that people suggest, you know, government could ban it or this or that. And I don't find any of these to be quite compelling as a threat. I mean, sure, they could, but as I was mentioning earlier, they don't they don't end the economic incentive for people to use Bitcoin, and economic incentives are more powerful than guns. requirements. And so people will find a way around them. And so for me, this is, I think, I may have been maybe the only one who came up with this idea. I think the most effective way to kill Bitcoin would be to destroy the economic incentive for people to use it. How would you do that? I think the best bet would be to go back to the gold standard. If we have a free market in banking and a free market in money, and if everybody can choose whatever currency they want, then central banks could go back, offer gold as a reliable option. Gold has a 6,000-year first mover advantage on Bitcoin, and it's quite likely, quite possible that people will just continue to use the current infrastructure, but with gold base, like it was in the 19th century, and that might probably kill demand for Bitcoin quite significantly. Maybe the price drops to $1 after that happens, and then it's not just the gold standard, it's also, banking freedom. It's the idea that you can use your bank to buy whatever you want and the government can't confiscate your money and so on. If everybody goes back to, say, a Swiss bank account like they were in the 1950s, if every country has that, then I think the demand for Bitcoin would collapse. I think that would be the most serious threat to Bitcoin. And generally, the more responsible monetary policy and the more liberal governments are, I think that would knock the wind out of Bitcoin's sails. This is what I would think is the most serious threat to Bitcoin, how I see it.
Thank you.
Sorry, you have one more question?
All right, sure.
So I've been sitting back waiting to see if somebody would ask a question. Trying to get some answers on that. I think that the no single point of attack is reaching this point where Bitmain now control proof of work, really reaching 35% with Npool and BTC.com. As you've seen with Verge and Bitcoin Gold and some of that, when it reaches for 51% attack, it creates a potential exposure for Bitcoin, and there is obviously predictions out there that will collapse, and of course the claim of no single point of attack is no longer valid, because when Bitmain control more than 51%, the potential hacking and attack might happen.
The way that I think of this is that miners, having an infrastructure and having all these miners and having spent all that capital on developing miners does not put them in a position to dictate anything to the network. On the contrary, it makes them slaves to the network. If you've invested millions of dollars on equipment, the only way that you will get your money back is if you abide by the rules of the network, which is why Bitmain, for all of their luster and all the stuff about Bitcoin Cash, 90% of their hash rate is on Bitcoin and not on Bitcoin Cash. So I think, the metaphor I like to give for this is, imagine, it's like saying, the janitors in the White House are going to take over the US government, because janitors are essential, and if they stop cleaning the bathrooms in the White House, you might get a disease outbreak, and then, there'll be a takeover. Well, no, because you're only a janitor in the White House if you follow the rules and you do what you're required to do. And the moment that you start messing around is the moment you're fired and they get somebody else. And that's really the situation with miners. And I think if we saw it in 2017, that's what happened. The miners tried to dictate what they wanted, and all that happened is that they ended up with just another altcoin. Bitcoin itself continues. It doesn't care. And it's there. It's offering, Bitcoin currently offers about $100,000 reward for miners every 10 minutes. So if miners choose to, change the rules of consensus, all that they're doing is they're giving up that reward. And so other miners will turn up and they will take that reward. So it is a concern, however, from a security perspective, that, a government could say, get into Bitmain and backdoor the equipment and something like that. But the answer to that is just, as the price rises, the chip production technology becomes more profitable, more companies get into it. And processing power is it's not magic. And Bitmain is not the world's biggest processing power producer. Intel, Nvidia, all these companies, if Bitcoin continues to rise, they're likely going to start entering it. We'd like to see more companies enter this field. And I think, when that happens, we'll get more diversity and it becomes less and less likely that they could be compromised. And, also Bitmain now they're IPOing. So, when you think about the company that's on the stock market, it's answerable to its shareholders. It's highly unlikely that they would want to sabotage their shareholders in order to destroy Bitcoin, because that would just completely destroy them. So, yeah, that's all I think.
All right, thank you, Saif. That was really awesome. I actually have a degree in econ and got really interested in, when I was studying economics, got really interested in monetary theory, monetary policy, and all that stuff. And that's how I found Bitcoin. And now I live in a very technical world, and I love tech, but it was a real treat to go back to the monetary theory of Bitcoin. So thank you. And thank you all for your awesome questions. Please hang out and get to know one another. We'll be here for a little bit until Bria kicks us out, which hopefully it'll give us a little bit of time. I also, one more time, want to thank our sponsors, which is the Blockchain Institute. So thank you very much, and I will talk to you all very soon. Thank you.
If you walk straight down the hallway,